And we're back in the car like we never left. Welcome to the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of your Easter Sunday afternoon here with me in New York. But once again, we're going to skip past all that promotional jazz and get right to the guts of the episode. Another sports-themed episode, kind of moving away from movies because there's just so much stuff to talk about when it comes to sports, whether it's boxing, whether it's baseball, and this is going to be another baseball-themed episode. As many of you know, certainly if you followed the channel for a while, I grew up a diehard Yankee fan. Like, not just any old big Yankee fan, but a lunatic, they talk about lunatic fringe in politics. I was a lunatic fringe Yankee fan. And a lunatic fringe Yankee fan, the way that I would describe it, is that I not only tried to watch every pitch of every single Yankee game, come hell or high water, I rooted viciously against the Mets. The two things went hand in hand. But I am not that kind of fan anymore. I still don't root for the Mets, but I don't take delight in Mets fan suffering as I once did. Fear is the path to the dark side. Hate is the path to the dark side. Hate leads to suffering. Yoda. Very smart man. But today is the 64th birthday of my single favorite New York Yankee. And that would be Donald Arthur Mattingly. And Donald Arthur Mattingly, or just Don, the hitman, Donnie Baseball, should not have been a tragic figure. And his name doesn't come up that much, or I should say it doesn't come up. Certainly you see clips of him on TikTok and on social media from when he was in his prime. The guy was a fucking monster hitter. Didn't look the part, but he was a monster hitter. But in terms of just younger fans, his name doesn't come up that much because he was not anywhere near a so-called five-tool player, as is the best New York Yankee since Mickey Mantle, Aaron Judge, a legitimate five-tool player. Those guys do not grow on trees. It is very rare and almost impossible, especially from the perspective of can your farm system develop star players, to develop a five-tool player, because those tools, some of them have to be kind of God-given, quote-unquote. You can't teach somebody to have a cannon for a throwing arm. In the case of Don Mattingly, he was an incredible fielder. He could hit for power. He was a three-tool player, but he had an okay throwing arm. You don't need a cannon to play first. And he really couldn't run. I don't even think that he was an average speed runner. I think that in my best day, I could have outrun Mattingly. He really didn't run well for a guy who was a great athlete in other ways and had incredible hand-eye coordination, as evidenced by the number of home runs he would hit relative to his strikeouts. He had a couple of years where he was Joe DiMaggio level as far as 35 homers, 38 strikeouts, and 650 plate appearances. Just crazy numbers showing his ability to not just put the ball in play, but hit the fucking hell out of the ball while putting it in play. But Don Mattingly his name started to come up towards the end of David Wright's career. And the phrase that was heard about David Wright was when Wright first got his career going, circa mid-2000s. He was a primary mover in the 2006. He was so young. The 2006 team, which came within a whisker of getting to the World Series. And the idea of Met fans, and a lot of different people said a variation on this, we thought David Wright was going to become our Derek Jeter, but instead he became our Don Mattingly. And the easiest way to explain that is, without the back injury, David Wright, who had seemingly congenital back issues, we don't really know if Mattingly's problem was congenital. But both of those guys, in an alternate version of reality, do not have back issues and end up first ballot Hall of Famers. I mean, David Wright was well on his way to being a first ballot Hall of Famer. The homers, the RBIs, the leadership ability, the fact that he walked softly, carried a big stick, as they say. He had the respect of his teammates. He was a tough player, not afraid to play hurt. Don Mattingly was a victim of circumstance. He was a victim of a time in which, and I always talk about this, but it bears repeating, there were only 4 playoff slots for the entire 28 teams of Major League Baseball. There were 2 divisions in each league, and if you did not win your division, you were on the golf course the day after the season ended. And Don Mattingly was on a number of really good New York Yankees teams in the 80s and into the 90s. But without the extra playoff berths, he did not go to a playoff until his final season, 1995, when to say that he was a shell of his former self is to not do justice to how great he was. And he was a pretty good prospect, but he slipped to the 19th round because the Yankees were convinced that he was going to go to college and that they didn't want to waste a draft pick. You know, it's not like football with the draft picks where every pick is so critically important, but you still don't want to waste picks. And there were plenty of teams that were interested in Mattingly, but the problem with Don, as a kid, they said he can play the outfield. He looks like he has the tools to be a terrific defensive first baseman. He's very quick around the bag, but he came up as an outfielder. I should point out, he played the outfield with the Yankees in his first year where he got some heavy action, which was 1983. But he was not projected to hit home runs. And even in the early 1980s, before sabermetrics, before people understood that Adam Dunn, hitting .210 with 200 strikeouts, but hitting 40 home runs, was a much more valuable player than Juan Pierre hitting .330, not drawing walks, and not hitting home runs. And the numbers are not even close. But the people who were interested in Mattingly, including the Yankees, the problem with him and why he even slipped to the 19th round, forgetting the stuff with college, they didn't think he was going to hit the ball out of the ballpark. And even back then, you wanted a first baseman who could reach the seats when he squared the baseball up. So Don rocketed through the minor leagues, and I think he had a season at Greensboro. You know, the teams are different. In the old days, the Yankees AAA was just called Columbus, the Columbus Clippers. And the Fort Lauderdale Yankees, near where my dad's dad, the not great-grandpa, but my amazing Grandpa Nat, lived about 5 minutes from the Fort Lauderdale Stadium. And Don Mattingly rocketed through the minor leagues. But you look at his numbers, yeah, he was hitting .330, .340, and he had a couple of seasons with 100 RBIs. Look at 7 homers, 9 homers. Organizations like the Yankees, who are used to winning, you've got to do better than that. It's not good enough, because at the major league level, if you got 9 homers in 500-something plate appearances, 500-something at-bats, even in 1982, that does not project to be a major league outfielder, a major league first baseman, unless you're hitting .370, unless you're a Wade Boggs type of player or a Tony Gwynn. But the irony with Mattingly was he was way better than projected. And this is something that happens for every Alex Rodriguez or Bryce Harper or Mike Trout. You have somebody with the unbelievable skill sets who actualize the potential. There are plenty of huge prospects, and the Yankees had a lot of them come through their system, like Hensley Mullins, like Kevin Moss, to a somewhat lesser extent. Hensley was a bigger prospect, who just can't put it together at the major league level. But then you have certain people like Don Mattingly, and I'll give you another name from the past, a near Hall of Famer, David Robertson. Remember? Terrific relief pitcher with the Yanks. He was with the Mets. He was with the White Sox. You look at his career numbers. David Robertson was a middling prospect who was way better at the major league level than anyone expected. Andy Pettitte was a big prospect, but nobody thought he was going to have the career that he did. Third best Yankee starter in franchise history behind Guidry and Ford. That was somebody who ended up making way more of a career than he was expected to. So Don Mattingly got a cup of coffee with the Yanks. He maybe had a few at-bats in 81, the sort of disastrous 1981 season where they went to the World Series and lost just a terrible World Series to the Dodgers, where they should have won. They won the first 2 going away, went to L.A., blew 3 consecutive games with leads. 2 of them they had big leads and they lost. And then they lost Game 6 at the stadium. Just a fucking disaster of a World Series. And Mattingly, played a little bit more in 82, but he was still a rookie in 1983, and he had a number that some of you my age and older know. He was number 46 on the 1983 team. But my memory of him, just as a 9-year-old boy who watched, a good amount of the games, at least parts of it with his father, my dad was very lenient. He was so lenient with bedtime. My mom was a little bit more of a stickler, but Dad, he didn't get to spend that much time with me because he was always working. The train commute to the city is never easy, whether you live in Huntington, as he later did, or Massapequa. Not as bad of a train commute. It's not even close, actually. It's got to be 20 minutes shorter. But he liked to sit, and we'd watch the games, and he enjoyed the fact that I knew baseball, and I remembered the players, and he got a big kick out of it. You don't know what goes on in the mind of a parent, but my father liked that I was so engaged with this stuff. But Mattingly came up as an outfielder. I didn't know that he had played any first base in the minors. Nowadays, a kid like me, I would have had that information at my fingertips, and I would have said, oh, so he played a lot of first base, and he's just in the outfield because, they had guys like Roy Smalley and Ken Griffey Sr. playing first base, and heaven forbid, Steve Balboni, bye-bye Balboni. They had people like that playing first. Dave Collins did some time there. So there really was no room for Mattingly, seemingly, at first base. But a kind of notorious game in Yankees history in 1983, it was June of 83, I think it was June, maybe it was July, the Pine Tar game. You all remember the Pine Tar game where George Brett hit an apparent game-winning 2-run homer off the Goose, Hall of Famer versus Hall of Famer Rich Gossage, and Brett hit a fucking moonshot off Goose. He had too much pine tar on his bat, and they ended up calling him out. The Yankees won the game, but of course the league office, Lee McPhail, who really didn't like the Yankees very much, wanted to stick it to the Yanks, and he overturned. George Brett didn't just have too much pine tar, he had way too much pine tar on the bat. But McPhail fucked up. For whatever reason, he overturned it. The Royals ended up getting the win in that game, which is just an absolute joke. It would have been a much bigger scandal if something like that happened now and they overturned something that was so obvious. Like, you're allowed to have this much pine tar. Brett had like that much pine tar. The whole bat was covered in pine tar. But Brett's home run was with a runner on first and 2 outs, and the Yankees had a 1-run lead. And the reason why they even got to 2 outs with a man on first and 1 out, I think it might have been Amos Otis. I'm not sure about that. Or UL Washington. But Don Mattingly was at first base in the 9th inning. He came in as a defensive replacement. And whoever it was on the Royals, with a man on and 1 out, hit a frozen rope. It was supposed to be a double down the first baseline, maybe even a triple, if the right fielder is playing off the line. And Don Mattingly, 21-year-old future hitman, made an unbelievable leaping, twisting backhand catch for the 2nd out. And then Brett hit that homer. But me watching that, I got to be honest, at 9 years old, I'm like, why isn't this guy playing more first base? Pretty obvious. That was one of the best catches that I had ever seen a first baseman make up to that point. So the following year, Roy Smalley, a really good player. He's somebody who would have probably been a bigger star in today's game because he was a switch hitter with pretty much equal ability from both sides of the plate. He was likable, he's a nice looking guy. Roy Smalley was supposed to be the Yankees first baseman the following year in 84. But there are certain cliches like Lou Gehrig, once he got in the lineup, the Yankees couldn't get him out of the lineup. The guys like Whitey Witt and I forgot not Hal Chase. There was the guy who had he had a headache, heard round the world, and Lou Gehrig took over for him. And here comes the 2,130 game, consecutive games played streak. But Mattingly started the 1984 season as the first baseman, and there was no reason to take him out of the lineup. He's an incredible hitter. He was a phenomenal fielder. He was even better than we thought, and he showed power. He wasn't ever a big monster home run hitter. But Don Mattingly went from a guy with 9 homers in 600 and something plate appearances. He turned into a guy who in a normal season was going to hit 25 to 35. And if that's not Adam Dunn, his other metrics, the other numbers kind of underneath the radar were a lot better than the Adam Dunn style player or even the Frank Thomas style player. So Don Mattingly in 1984, and 84 was a bit of a transitional season for the Yankees. Some of the older players, Steinbrenner had miscalculated in the early part of the decade. George did a lot of really dumb things, and I don't mean corruption. He did a lot of dumb things. He made a number of strange free agent signings, guys like Dave Collins, like Ken Griffey Sr. He overpaid for Smalley. He overpaid for certain relievers and pitchers that he just happened to like Marty Bystrom and John Montefusco. Just made a lot of mistakes. But keeping Mattingly at first, sticking him there and just letting him do his thing was ingenious. And Don Mattingly, despite the fact that the Yankees of 1984, they were beaten out of sight by the Detroit Tigers. Tigers started the season 35-5. 35-5. Like, that's not baseball, Susan. That's Chicago Bulls 1996 level. You're not supposed to be able to do that in baseball. So although the Yanks ended up with 87 wins in 1984, which you could call the first year of Mattingly's prime, they were nowhere. The season was over in April. They were done. They actually had the best record in baseball in the second half that year. Now, we'll start to get into a little bit of personal stuff with regards to the Hitman, as he was already known, Donnie Baseball. So, Dave Winfield, Hall of Famer, was still in his prime, and Winfield had a very long prime. He came up with the San Diego Padres in 1973, 74, and here we are a decade later, and Winnie is right in the middle of his prime still. Don Mattingly and Dave Winfield were neck and neck for the American League batting title in 1984. And as part of my, admittedly, very spoiled brat childhood, my dear old dad, who was in his very early 40s at the time, the firm that he was with, SCF & Co., I have the mug, on the desk inside, they had a partial season ticket plan, even better than the one that they had in later years. This one, the seats were even closer to the field. They were like first or second row, 15 feet up the first baseline. Later years, it was 6, 7, 8 rows back, about 30 feet up the first baseline. So I was at the last game of the 1984 season with my dad. It was just the two of us. And going into the last game of the season, Dave Winfield had a 1-point lead on Don for the batting title. But the way that the mechanics and the math worked out, if they had the same number of at-bats in that game, Winfield and Mattingly, that is, and Mattingly got one more hit than Dave. If Dave went 1 for 4 and Donnie went 2 for 4, Mattingly was going to win the batting title. The sense was that Mattingly had really been hitting the hell out of the ball, and Dave had kind of slumped a little bit. Winfield briefly challenged. There was some talk maybe he would hit 400, because that particular year, Big Dave didn't go for homers. He was trying to win a batting title, and he almost did. So Mattingly got 3 hits. I think he went 3 for 4 with a walk, or 4 for 5. Whatever it was, Winfield went 1 for 4, and Mattingly won the batting title 343 to 340. 343 to 341, excuse me. There is a clip on YouTube of Don Mattingly and Dave Winfield coming off the field together after Mattingly, I think, got his final hit, and it was understood that he was going to win the batting title. Winfield, I think, had got hit into a 4, so he was on base. So both guys came off the field at the same time. And there is something with memory when we're kids. I was 10 years old when this game played. I can still see it from my memory, not the YouTube video. The way that Mattingly flung his helmet, thought it was like the coolest thing. He just sort of flipped the helmet in the direction of the dugout. I just thought the way that it was bouncing and rolled, like he knew what he was doing, he just kind of flipped it up there. But Mattingly won the batting title, and at 343, 23 homers, 110 RBIs. That's pretty good for a first full season. And then the following year, he hit 324, 35, 145. He won the Gold Glove, by the way. He was just a spectacular fielding first baseman. Top 3 best fielding first baseman of all time. Most people put Keith Hernandez slightly above Mattingly. But there are those who say Listen, Keith was great, but Mattingly was just as great. His instincts, something I always talked about with Keith Hernandez, that he always knew what to do with the baseball. I mean, it's kind of obvious, but it isn't always obvious that sometimes you go to third or you go to second. Hernandez was like a computer on the field, and Donnie had a lot of that same kind of ability. The 1985 Yankees are easily top 5 best teams that did not go to the postseason. They went 97-64. They only played 161. There was no need for them to play the final game. The Toronto Blue Jays ended up beating them out by 2 games. The Yankees went into the last weekend of the season in Toronto needing to sweep 3. Good luck. You know what I mean? Good luck. And they won the first game, but they lost the second. And then in the third game, Mattingly ended up hitting another home run to finish at 35 and 145. And Phil Niekro, Nuxie, the late great, I think he's passed, Phil Niekro, the knuckleball pitcher, he won his 300th game that day, the last day of the 1985 season. But about a week before that, here in New York, we had something called Hurricane Gloria. And Hurricane Gloria was pretty horrendous. It was the worst hurricane that I lived through until Superstorm Sandy, which was actually way worse. But Hurricane Gloria fucked a lot of stuff up. And my dad and I went to a twilight doubleheader. You don't have that many of those anymore. We went to a twilight doubleheader at the stadium. The Yankees pretty much had to win out just to have the chance in Toronto. And in this twilight doubleheader, Don Mattingly hit 2 home runs in the first game, and he hit a solo homer in the second game. And the Yankees swept that doubleheader to kind of stay in contention. They just had to get to Toronto with a chance. That's all we wanted. And, you know, they came close, but they came up short. And with no wild cards, 97 wins, they're on the golf course the day after the season ends. The other thing with that doubleheader is that Baltimore Orioles manager Earl Weaver, he has a major league record that can't ever be broken. It can only be tied. He got thrown out of both ends of the doubleheader. Weaver was such a character, always screaming and yelling and kicking dirt on the umpires. But yeah, Earl Weaver thrown out of both ends of the doubleheader. It was an absolute riot. And we knew what was going on while we were sitting there. The Yanks then kind of slowly went downhill. Statistically speaking, 1986 was probably Mattingly's best year. 238 hits. He had like 62 doubles, 31 homers, 113 RBIs. He had a chance to win the batting title again, but his future teammate and friend, Wade Boggs, kind of pansied out. I hate to say it. I love Boggs as a Yankee, but Wade sat out the last number of games of the season to get ready for the playoffs. But he was worried if he had a couple of shitty games, Mattingly could have caught him for the batting title. Mattingly was going to have to hit 750 in the 4 games. He had a couple of big games in that series, but ultimately came up short for the batting title. And that always left a bad taste in the mouths of Yankee fans. That Boggs didn't even try. Bro, you got to do it. I mean, this guy deserves your best. Get out there and just fucking play. The opposite of Ted Williams, right? Remember that famous story where they were going to sit him down because technically he hit 400 and Williams said, fuck that, I'm going to keep playing. What are you kidding me? And he ended up hitting 406 because he went on a tear when the manager wanted to sit him down to guarantee that he would hit 400. Hey, everyone does it differently. But the 86 Yankees were beaten out of sight. And then the 87 Yankees were beaten out of sight. Both of those teams would have gone to the playoffs under today's structure. They were 90-win teams, but 90 wins doesn't do any good when you have to win a division, and a division winner is at 98 or 99. The season feels like it's over in July or August. And unfortunately, in 1987, Don Mattingly suffered a back injury, kind of horsing around in the clubhouse. Now, I think that he had some kind of a congenital problem that was always going to crop up, but nobody really knows. He had never complained about it or never talked about having any kind of unusual issues with his back. But he was never the same after that 1987 back injury. Statistically, he had an enormous year in 87. He famously hit 6 grand slams, the major league record. He also had home runs in 8 consecutive games, which tied Dale Long's major league record, a record which was then tied by Ken Griffey Jr., the son of one of Don's favorite former teammates, Griffey Sr. I loved Griffey Sr. as a Yankee. What a great, not his son. He wasn't as good as his son. He was a really good baseball player. But Don's career went downhill as the Yankees started to just not be that good anymore. And 88, he had what would have to be considered an off year, only knocked in 88 runs, but the back was bothering him. He couldn't turn on the ball the way that he had. He hit in this crouch, and he used to kind of explode out of the crouch. He just couldn't do it anymore. He wasn't capable. He wasn't loose enough. His lower back was always barking at him. 1989, he had one final really good season where he hit over 300, knocked in over 100 runs. But as far as him being one of the better players in baseball, or for a time the best player in baseball, certainly 84, 85, 86, 87, he was considered the best player in baseball, despite the fact that he couldn't run and he didn't have a great throwing arm. He was never that player again after that. The irony is, kind of cruel irony, is he turned into what the Yankees thought he was going to be. Somebody who was capable of hitting 300, fielding his position, but just didn't hit enough power, didn't hit for enough power. And you look at his numbers in seasons like 1992 and 93 and 94, you see a guy who was a useful player, but that's not a championship caliber first baseman as the sport was evolving. I hate to say it, but prime Tino Martinez was better than the 1989 Don Mattingly and the 88 Don Mattingly, because Tino was a guy, he wasn't a 300 hitter, but he hit the ball out of the ballpark, and he was a good first baseman. He wasn't Mattingly, but as far as right-handed throwing first baseman, man, Tino was fucking great at first. But you understand what I'm saying. Mattingly's style of player was outmoded. He was no longer a great player. He had 15 homers and 80-something RBIs in 92, and he had a very similar year in 93. He just couldn't hit the ball out of the ballpark consistently anymore. And the 93 Yankees had turned it back around because the team was under 500, 1989, 1990, 91, and 92. But by 93, Steinbrenner was back, he put other people who knew more about baseball than him in charge of things. And this was critically important because the 1994 Yankees were going to win the American League East. They were definite title contenders. And then there was the strike. And the season ended in August. I think August 12th was the last day. And 1995 was the first of many magical seasons in the Bronx at the old ballpark. And it was Donnie's last year. And I've always looked at it, if you believe in such things, as cosmic intervention or serendipity or whatever word you want to use. The 95 Yankees came into the season expected to run away with the American League East. But by mid-August, they were fucked. And it was the first year of the wild card. There were so many angry fans with good reason. We pay money to see a team. We were hoping for a World Series. The season ends August 12th. F to the U. The Yankees were nowhere. The season appeared to be over with little more than a month to go. And then inexplicably, they went 25-6 down the stretch, made the postseason. And Don Mattingly finally got to hear the cheers of his home ballpark in October. And damned if he didn't play like the old Donnie. Just for a little bit, for a couple of games, a 5-game series. He had big hits in every game, except game 3 where Randy was Randy, right? He was right in his prime, speaking of people in their prime. But those 2 games in the Bronx, in the 1995 American League Division Series, game 2 in particular, if I could go back in time to any one Yankees game in history, that's the game I wish I could go to. More so than game 6 of the 96 World Series. Dad and I would have gone to game 7 if there had been one, but I am very happy there was not a game 7 and the World Series was over in 6. But Don Mattingly's home run, tie-breaking home run in the 6th inning of game 2 of the 95 ALDS against the Ken Griffey Jr. led Seattle Mariners, is the most emotional moment of my Yankee rooting life. And I still tear up thinking about it. And young boomers, some elder millennials, but Gen Z can't understand. You look at Mattingly's career stats, they're not really that impressive. You have to go season by season to see what he was doing, really, when he was in his prime. Because his prime slash line from 1984 through 89, so 6 years, 25 homers, 110 ribbies, 315, 320 batting average. Those are Hall of Fame numbers. It just didn't do it for long enough. But Mattingly's homer, after all the shit that he swallowed from Steinbrenner, sniping at him, telling him he needed to get a haircut, all this fucking bullshit, Mattingly rose in those playoffs, and the Yankees won both games at the stadium. Mattingly being a huge part of, Paul O'Neill. There were a lot of guys that were huge players, literally, in the Joe Torre championship era. David Cohn, and as I said, Wade Boggs, and the young Mariano Rivera. Bernie Williams was just finding his way to stardom at that particular time. But Donnie was only 34, and when the Yankees lost all three in Seattle to lose that playoff, manager Buck Showalter, we knew wasn't coming back. And man, 34 years old is not that old for a baseball player. I mean, Aaron Judge is about to turn 33, and he's right in his prime. But Donnie walked away. He retired. The Yanks brought in Tino Martinez and a lot of other big players, and they won 4 World Series in the next 5 years without him. And it is unfortunate because there is a version, as we said with David Wright, there is a version of Don Mattingly's career where he does not injure his back, and he continues to play at a very high level until, let's say, the late 1990s. Because there was nothing preventing him from, let's say, being on the 98 Yankees. It would have been his age 36, 37 season. It's not that old. We've seen guys have huge seasons till they're 40, and even in some cases past it. But Mattingly was done at 34. And there were a couple of moments over time. He thought maybe he was going to be the Yankees manager, and it didn't work out. They went with Joe Girardi. He ended up making a bunch of postseasons as manager of the Dodgers, and then he worked for Derek Jeter in Florida. And, I hope at some point that Donnie comes back to the Yankees, even if it's just as a coach, because he worked as a coach. He could have won a World Series as a coach, and the Yankees didn't win in that era. They had a chance in 03. Obviously, they lost to the Marlins, and then they had the opportunity in 04, and they lost that awful series to Boston. The less said about that, the better. But I hope against hope that at some point, Donnie Baseball comes back to the Yankees, and like to see him be on the coaching staff or be part of a championship team with Aaron Judge. Because Don Mattingly right now is the greatest Yankee who never won a World Series. And 10 years from now, I hope he is still the greatest Yankee to never win a World Series. Because it's going to be Aaron Judge, obviously. I mean, Aaron Judge is top 10 greatest players in the history of the franchise. It's not even close. Judge is that good. He really is. Oh, he can't hit in the playoffs. Fine. You can find a lot of different playoff series where the clutch players suck. It's different. You're not going to be fantastic in every series. I've never felt that Judge cost the Yankees any particular series any more than A-Rod. Think about some of the series where A-Rod sucked. The Yankee pitching was worse. They scored enough runs to win. Sometimes the pitching lets you down. And then you could say, well, A-Rod hit 180. It was his fault, or words to that effect. But it's baseball. That's the way it goes. But I hope that Don Mattingly, my favorite Yankee, I hope he has had and continues to have a happy 64th birthday. Donald Arthur Mattingly, the Hitman, forever. Donnie Baseball, forever number 23, and forever the best first baseman any of us are ever going to see. This has been episode 494 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all so much for spending some of your Easter afternoon here with me in New York. If you check out this episode on the YouTube channel, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you catch this episode on the audio platforms such as Podbean, Spotify, iTunes, or the others in which we're hosted, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, and turn on those notifications. I'll be back with a new episode real soon. Till then, peace.